right, Zach, we have our first podcast of the year, and what better way to start it than with two Zachs on the same podcast? No better way to kick off the year. So we have Zach from Helpfully. So psyched to have you here. It's been great to connect with you. We were just chatting before this. Sounds like you have a lot of great stories for us. So, Zach, thank you for being here with us today.
Love it. Two Zachs on a podcast. Welcome to 2024. I'm really glad to be here on Insights Innovators. Really love what you're doing, Zach, and can't wait for today's conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm psyched too. What better way to start 2024? So to kick us off, Zach, can you just give us a little bit of background kind of on yourself, maybe a little bit about your story, and then tell us what you do at Helpfully?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. My background is actually pretty interesting. I think so many people get into insights and into user experience from a lot of different directions. Mine is a path that I took. I grew up in a pretty small town in Georgia, and I was like, get me out of small towns. So I went to the University of Chicago, big city, cold weather, a lot of big changes for me as a teenager. And I studied philosophy at the University of Chicago. I was really interested in all the things that are in philosophy, but really was already, even in high school and definitely in college, really interested in the sort of technology as this whole new big frontier. It was, really coming into focus for everyone at that time. Like, technology was moving very fast. And so I started to study kind of, the history and sort of the philosophy of science, and even like the philosophy of computer science, right? So this really niche, cool area. Got to dig into the early days of the internet, and worked with a bunch of great students on all kinds of cool projects, really at that intersection between kind of what can technology do, what is technology, what does it mean, and then actually, of course, using tech every day in our lives as well. And so, yeah, my background started there, and then I was back in Atlanta. A few years later, I went into the .com heyday. It was an early, heady time, probably before your time and before the time of many of our viewers. But when the .com crash came, I moved back to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was working as a technologist at Emory University, helping them run one of these big scientific centers there, and then also joined Georgia Tech as a grad student in human-computer interaction. So I actually have a degree from Tech in HCI, and then worked on a PhD there at Tech for a good long few years as well. But then consulting caught me too well and too much, and made too much money in consulting. And so I left my PhD program, but started to work in agencies and in technology consulting companies as well.
That's awesome, and I swear this wasn't planned. But
Not a plant.
not only am I also named Zach, but I also did philosophy. I don't think we knew that going into this. So
We did not. Man, that's
there's
cool. What kind
there's
of
another
philosophy do you
connection.
like? Who's your favorite? Who's
So I actually got to I got to study under John Searle when he was at UC Berkeley.
Oh, wow,
He did a
cool.
lot of really cool philosophy of mind stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, fun fact
Really
about him
famous.
is
If for all of you viewers out there, yeah, there's a really famous, I guess, like thought experiment called Searle's Chinese Room, and you should look it up because it's really cool.
yeah, yeah, the Chinese room argument. And I mean, a fun fact about him is I think he consulted for the Matrix when they were doing
Yeah,
like
I
shooting
did
the
not know
original
that.
Matrix.
That's cool, man.
um, so yeah,
Um,
I got to study under Searle, and then I actually did. I mostly focused on mathematical logic. So it sounds
okay.
like you were in kind of like the philosophy of science kind of
Yep.
space. I was
Yep.
adjacent to that. Had some overlap with like some pure mathematics students and stuff like that. So
Wow, that's so
we'll
cool.
see what other.
That was one of the hardest classes I ever took in college, was predicate logic, right? Like that class in mathematical logic.
Oh, it was brutal. It was like
That's
the
really
mo.
heavy.
It was both the most interesting thing to me and the hardest thing like possible. And so of course I was like, yeah, I just have to like double down on this and, and do a ton of logic. So it was a little bit brutal, but we got through it. So yeah, we'll see what other sort of connections we establish by the end
Awesome.
of this podcast. We'll actually find out we're the same person. Uh, so so where I wanted to take it from there is, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Helpfully? So you said you kind of got pulled into the world of consulting, and
Definitely.
so now you're at, yeah, at Helpfully. So tell us, yeah, what you guys do and what your role is there.
Yeah, Hopefully is a niche consultancy. We only focus on the human insights that power new digital products, new services, new offerings for companies. And so what that looks like every day is we are in charge of the research efforts that define and refine all of the ideas that come out of either big corporate innovation labs and hubs, and then we also do a good bit of work with startups who are, have a good idea, have a tiny prototype, have a proof of concept, but then need to actually like turn that into a working product and a product that can sell in the market. So really
Right.
lucky, really great space to be in. My my consulting background was really in those digital agencies. Worked at some kind of digital ad agencies back in the day, and then those companies were, of course, exploring and trying to figure out like what was going to happen when social media got big, when mobile got big, when applications started to become something that brands needed to do and their clients needed to work on, and then also I went eventually to kind of an innovations consultancy and helped them set up some of those like innovation programs, innovation. This was the era of the Google Design Sprint, those kind of faster moving ways for companies to really take advantage of research, right? And there's always there's a part of any good design sprint is going to be like, well, what do we know today? What are we confident of going into this, and where might we not have confidence? And so, yeah, so when I started Helpfully in 2015, now 8 years ago, I really wanted to get even more tight into that sort of upfront set of questions and offerings. So we really spend our time, as I said, doing research, spending time with human beings who are going to be the users and customers and clients of the thing. And then as well doing, kind of that product strategy work. So all those kind of fuzzy questions around, should we make this thing? What will it be like when it works? What is it competing with, both in the market and in the minds of those users? And then, how does it work? How does it look? So we do a good bit of, I guess, UX design as well, but really focused on that kind of upfront effort to make sure we're defining a product that's going to work in the market and just really be something that people find indispensable.
Oh, I love your background, Zach, because not only are you really steeped in like the world of research, specifically innovation research, which I find super interesting, but you've also been doing it since. I mean, you were mentioning like you were really kind of in the early days of the tech boom, and you've been doing sort of technology focused research. That's a lot of who we also try to serve at Reveal is companies who are trying to reach their customers to build better products, to put it simply. And you've been in the game basically for since the game existed. So
I sometimes look back and I'm like, man, like when I started in my professional life, like I've been in UX design since really before that was a job to have. Um, I got my first job out of college though, and I was a user experience specialist, and it was like I was the only one at a company of 50 people. And just to go back in the history books, like they didn't even know where a person like that would sit because that person is not, right, purely speaking, a designer. And I don't know if you know, but the design cultures, especially at ad agencies, is very strong. And they were like, you can't sit with us. Like they were like, you can't be in the studio because they were like, tell me more about what you do. Oh, you're not us. And so was not allowed to be in the studio, but then of course not an engineer either, not a developer. And so wound up sitting with the project managers at that time because even for a pretty sophisticated agency, we were in Boston, Massachusetts at the time. Just no one knew what to do with UX. Like it wasn't a thing that everyone knew they needed at that time, and so we had to do that education work and make sure that people understood. Like, hey, we're also going to bring in not just your creative designer, your the creative directors, and all of those graphic design types, but we're going to bring in, right, like someone who knows, right, what information architecture is, and how important that is for a website. In the year 2000 and 2001, like that wasn't a thing people were really worried about. They were just letting either engineers for the right kind of project, or they were just letting creatives, um, you know, build IA for large and sophisticated websites. And if you are lucky enough to be old enough to have experienced those websites, you'll remember, right? Like websites weren't as well organized as they are today because they just didn't have the right teams, right? They didn't have that perspective at the table.
Yeah. Well, I could see how that experience, potentially helped with your innovation consulting because your early career was in itself kind of an innovation. You had to be, the
Yeah,
first
we had to
guy
make
at the
the plane
company.
as we flew it for sure.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear kind of more about your philosophy for, how you approach research at Helpfully, and then it sounds like you have some good stories to share with us. But if we can start at the top,
Sure,
and
yeah.
you've mentioned in other chats we've had, you take a very human centric approach to your research at Helpfully, and your goal is to really take human insights and use those to drive the development of wonderful products. So can you tell us maybe kind of big picture, what is your sort of human centric philosophy behind your research at Helpfully?
Yeah, great question. I think I'm going to say like a simple sentence and then really dig into it. So I think our philosophy is just start with people. And what that looks like, though, is I think worth unpacking because so many of all of us, right, who work in insights, work in market research, work in UX, we all have like a really specific kind of T-shaped skill, right? Have a deep skill somewhere. And for most people in most situations, it's very cognitive. And as someone who's studied cogSci and the philosophy of mind, right? Like we think about humans in a very mental way, right? And we focus our efforts and all of the work that we're bringing to bear is like, well, what's happening inside of the skull of a single human being, right? Who's our user. And I don't think that's wrong, but I certainly think that that's limited. And so for me, I think the philosophy that I have is to pick and choose the set of tools and the set of frameworks, even like philosophical or conceptual frameworks, um, that are right for the users that you care about, right? For the customers and that any company needs to go and solve on their behalf. And what that looks like is you need to be, I would say, promiscuous in terms of picking and choosing all kinds of different things, not just that kind of pure play psychological mental view of a human being. A human is not just their mind. A human, of course, exists um, in a lot of ways, right? So you've got like sociology, thinking about the groups that they group into, both formal and informal, the dynamics there. Think about, for us at Hopefully, we love some of the lenses from anthropology. So thinking about culture and what does a culture mean, both in a very big, broad way, like all of society, but as well, like in the culture of a particular company, right? So companies have cultures and you can go and explore a company through the lens, right? Not just of what's happening and what emails get sent, but what does it all mean, right, to the people that are doing it? I think grabbing tools from anthropology can be really valuable. But I think also you want to be even broader than that, right? And go get things from advertising, from persuasion, from theater, from hospitality. Go grab, frameworks from history or literature, religion. So many things are driving, right, human experience and driving human behavior. And if you're limited in the tools you'll pick, I think that can bias the answers, right, that you're going to come up with, and I think that's dangerous. So as someone who's a broad thinker, I think there's power in just correctly picking and choosing, like, okay, in this situation the group dynamics matter so much, so we should spend a lot more time talking about the group and that part of it, or the identities, right? Sociology is obsessed with like how a particular person expresses all of their identity. Well, if that's important to the service you're building, the product you're building, well, then you should really focus in on like, well, how will I understand identity better? And whether those are quantitative, qualitative, a whole bunch of methods around that. But if those things matter to the business that you're in charge of, then you should go grab tools and techniques from those sciences, as well as sort of that more hands-on keyboards, fingers tapping screens kind of model.
I love kind of the way you laid that out because I think a lot of people and a lot of organizations when they think research, if they're not working with kind of like a dedicated research professional, they reach to the tools first. Kind of like you mentioned. So there's they'll go for customer interviews or they'll go for surveys or
Sure.
whatever the case may be. You kind of actually backed it up a step and said, actually, let's think about what kind of framework and what kind of answers we're trying to elicit in the first place. And so, kind of being able to begin with that framework in mind, whether you're trying to pull out elements of their identity or of their culture or the different things that are going to be important to them, and then letting those inform kind of the tools in your toolkit that you go and reach for. I think that's a really critical first step, and it sounds like hopefully
Yeah.
you really have like a breadth of you know widely diverse frameworks that you can kind of pick and choose from. So
Yeah,
I'd love to
that's
hear.
so
Oh,
right. I
sorry.
mean, I
Go
think
go ahead.
a survey, I just want to just reiterate your point and say, like, a survey as a kind of tool is just a tool that could be used in any direction. You can point that laser beam in hundreds, right, of different ways in the kinds of questions you ask, the specificity with which you ask those questions, all of those, the framing or the orientation, right, that you bring or that your business brings to that is, I think, far more valuable than just like, oh, we're going to have a survey tool and then we're going to branch the questions on this kind of more technical basis. I think so much of the work that you know you do, if you get to design a survey, is not just to sit down and just start writing questions, but think about, like, well, what are the kinds of people that we want, who's in our sort of broad market, but then who are our ideal customers, and what are we able to say about them, what drives them. I think you know we mentioned anthropology, we mentioned sociology. I even think like economics, or and certainly behavioral economics, is so interesting, right? As a way to think about, well, how are we able to influence and nudge behavior? How are we able to think about ways in which people are both extremely careful and rigorous and rational, uh, and also less rigorous and rational in some parts of their life? And that's not in any way a dig, right? I don't think that there's no judgment when I say, in some sense, people are not rational. When we look around the world, I mean, you can see, right? People are not driven by pure rationality. Well, we could use, right, all those insights as resources, right, for either the surveys we write, the interview questions that we come up with.
Yeah, and so I'd love to actually hear maybe some of your sort of stories from the field here, because it sounds like you have some good ones for us. So can you maybe share a couple
Sure.
instances where you were in the field doing your research, working with companies, and applying these frameworks, and then we can kind of understand what this looks like in action. And if it happens to be some good fun stories, then that's bonus for sure.
Definitely. One story that comes to mind, I think, that really sort of speaks to this question about, like, really getting beyond kind of the platitude or beyond the company's understanding. We were working for a very big grocery chain there in the Midwest, and they have so many stores, and hardly ever do you get a chance to work with a client, and they told us, we're at the kickoff meeting, and they're like, everyone is our customer. But then, of course, when they show you the data, these big grocery chains, pick your favorite one, they have millions of register rings, right? Millions of receipts every day, but they're addressing 30, 40%, sometimes even more, of the total number of households in America, right? And so when they say everyone, I mean, in this particular case, like, they're not wrong. And so, of course, right, they have a ton of deep insight and so much segmentation, different kinds of shoppers, different kinds of families. Of course, families differ on all these different dimensions. Uh, we actually dug into to this because they were interested in pulling together a lot of their data tools into shopper experiences. And one of them was about making a list, but it was very much so making a grocery list. That's the task. Very interesting for a company, and I just think this is true for all companies. So this isn't a dig on anyone. They're believe that um, people are pretty rational and that people shop according to their grocery list, and and they have data, just like all about how long people spend in stores and what those register receipts look like. They wanted to help people build better grocery lists. We did a bunch of projects in that arena, digital kind of tool sets. But they had this view that like people put the real thing on their grocery list, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna, help people by giving them like, well, you buy a lot of Cheerios, so we'll just add Cheerios to your grocery list." This has a bunch of implications. How accurate is it? How invasive does that feel? Like, does that feel weird? Does that give people like the ick? Um, and also, they wanted to pull their data to feed this tool from the SKUs, but that's not what really happens. We went, did the research, and actually had people submit to us like submit your grocery list, either paper, screenshot of your iPhone, notes app, however people are keeping grocery lists, post-it notes, wire-bound notebook. Some people are really organized shoppers and they have kind of a consistent list, so they have like the little check marks in either an app or another tool. And people write the most personally relevant things on these lists. They don't write Cheerios, they just write cereal. Or just the most ideal example, and this will give away that we were in the Southeast when we were doing some of this research. They wrote salad fixings on their list. And so we just made salad fixings like this, such a great example of how hard it's going to be to blend big data science, magic, AI tooling into this very human behavior of making a list, because that person did not write green pepper, onion, whatever, cucumber, whatever you think that goes in a salad. Is it romaine, or is it arugula, or is it iceberg, or is it spinach? Is it a Caesar? They just wrote salad fixings, and they know what that means to them and their household, and the salads they like to eat and make. Well, how does data science help you in that moment when so much of food and so much of eating is personal, culturally located, right? It's inside of a certain culture. All those things matter. And so the project evolved a good bit when we started to bring real data, real human made lists into these design sessions and into this kind of requirements gathering for this big new product. And it's just such a good example for me of like what it looks like when a team has like, we've got all this cool data, and then it's like, yeah, but look at human beings. And I just love that tension between the two. And obviously the solution we came to, I think, is so interesting. It's not launched yet, so I can't point you to it. But we came to some really cool conclusions out of that work, but really pulled the team from that more engineering mindset, from this is the data we have, and this is how it's going to look, and this is what we're going to be able to provide, into something that really felt a lot more connected, right, to the way in which people actually create lists. It was just more honest, right, to the human behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's a great story because from my perspective, it illustrates a couple of things. One is how the assumptions that we form based on purely kind of qualitative data can often be, at best, incomplete, at worst, terribly misleading.
Sure.
Uh, and but I understand the temptation, right? And when you're sitting, sort of like you're in the cockpit and you have access to all of this data, that's if you're running a grocery store, you can see all the SKUs, you can see how everything's selling, and the intuition is like, yeah, I can take this and build new products on top of it or new experiences on top of it because look at how much data I have. I know everything there is to know. about the people behind these purchases. But the catch is, once you go and you actually talk to the human beings, you get a completely different perspective, and you realize that there are things that can't be captured in this purely quantitative kind of 30,000 foot view of the person. It takes those one-on-one conversations, or it takes a more personalized sort of engagement to really draw out what is the full picture. um, and I think that tension, it'll probably always be there, but it's really cool how you sit basically right in the middle of that, where you're balancing. On one side, you have your client who has a ton of quantitative insights, which are valuable, and then
Totally.
on the other side, you
No,
have the
they got more
customer.
data than anyone. It was the coolest data we've ever seen, honestly. As um, just really fun to look at, that kind of data. Um, and then we've done the similar kind of work, right? Sometimes we're out in the field. We've done so that's that had this qualitative work. We literally just went and commissioned people to send us their grocery lists from a research panel. So received a couple hundred um, new inputs, right, for that project. But also did some shop alongs as well. So one of the things, right, that happens in a retail environment is you want to go into the store with customers and watch them do it. And so try not to make that weird, but putting teams out in the field and letting them kind of shop along with uh, individuals who are accomplishing their weekly shop. That was really good. And we wanted, of course, right, a smattering of people. Some people who used list making tools, some people who didn't, some people who were using even the company's own app to a little more close in kind of loyalists. And obviously grocery is a place where people spend a lot of time and money trying to find those people who will be loyal to the chain. um, and so yeah, did a lot of different kind of qualitative research there. We've done qualitative research in healthcare settings as well, and the same thing happens there, where the bias or the going in assumption is often that like decisions are clean, decisions are going to be made in a clear, methodical, logical way. And I'll give you the example of discharging people from the hospital. You believe naively, like I did, I certainly did believe this, hopefully had this project where we got to go and watch discharge happen. Discharging people from the hospital is not a simple, linear, methodical thing where you are in the hospital and then everyone agrees on this day, hey, tomorrow we're going to release you back to go recover at home. Obviously, so many different conditions are there and so many different kinds of post follow-ups. So there's a lot happening in hospitals, but I will say that we learned in this research effort, there are even like roles we didn't know about. So you are of course familiar, like the person who's going to agree that it's time to discharge you is the doctor, right? Like some medical professional. There's also nurses, and they play a pretty big role, but they're also healthcare providers. But then you've got like other people. So I'll just give you their names. There's case managers, and case managers are responsible not just for the health, right? They're responsible for the everything else of that person, um, up to and including that person's right ability to pay, of like how is their home life and situation. So somebody's there, a case manager or even social workers, right, who need to get involved in a patient's care. So you've got those two, and then there's also the hospital has like a lot of finance types and administrative types, and they care a lot about the dollars and cents, right, of a hospital stay. And every day that you stay in the hospital, you're just racking up money on the taxi meter. And so depending on who's paying for your care, the hospital is ready to get you out of this bed and back at home. And those different parties all get together over asynchronous and sometimes synchronous ways and negotiate how a particular patient is or isn't going to get discharged, get to go home. And so it was an incredible week that we got to spend in a hospital setting. We set up shop inside of the nurses lounge, and like all good researchers, like the best tips, like always bring donuts, like bring food, bring snacks, and you'll be accepted. But we were stationed there, but we got to move around. We actually were sort of like attached more on the research side to the case management team, and that's because when people are being discharged from the hospital, there's a lot of questions about to whom are you being discharged? So is there a family member? Is there a friend? Is there someone who's going to help you recover and take care of you? You know, and as well, like the home situation matters. And we were out in California for this particular project, and they told a story. We didn't see this happen, but they were releasing a patient to his van that he lived in, but which is fine, van lifer that he is. But in this case, it was like an old box truck, and they were like, "What's the bathroom situation like in this van?" And the hospital actually was worried, right, that this person's not going to be able, right, to like change their dressings, like get to the bathroom, get food, if they're not mobile and they live in a van and don't have someone to help. And so this case manager that we were working with, she told us this great story of like they went to the van to take photos to bring back to the team so they could all have a real discussion, right, about like, is this a safe, are we medically, right, approved to release this patient? And so the case manager has to just like go there and check it out. And so, those kinds of things come up a lot of times in health and healthcare. It's not just the medical team and their perspective, but it's like all of these people, and they do this delicate dance over basically your entire stay. When you're admitted, when you say, "Hey, we're going to admit this patient for this reason," they start a clock and they start a conversation, and it's like, about how long should it take? Everyone knows it should take about 3 to 5 days, but in between those two numbers, or if it's an exception flow, either on one side or the other, and it's going to go way long, and now it's going to be 10 days in the hospital, or there's complications. Um, the discharge conversation is like ongoing, but it starts on day one and just basically lasts the entire time that a patient's in the hospital. So it's just so cool to learn, kind of the behind the scenes, right, of how healthcare happens and the complexities that are, sort of like always there in those health environments.
I think one thing that story kind of draws out is the fact that from a high level perspective, whether I am maybe an operator at a company and I have access to a lot of user data, shopper data, whatever, or from the perspective of a consumer, like, well, in the sense of if I am consuming healthcare, I assume that I go into the hospital and then, someone puts a big red stamp on my thing that says discharge, and then I leave, right? There's this idea that these processes are very linear, very clean,
Totally.
um, and that we can capture a lot of what goes into making these decisions with kind of easily quantifiable or metricable data. And basically, what your stories have kind of drawn out so far is that one of the goals of research is actually engaging with the inherent messiness of the human experience
That's right.
and the human perspective. So I don't know if there's anything you can add about just sort of the why understanding that human element is so critical to research, and why we don't get the whole story from the much cleaner but ultimately kind of misleading, higher level perspective that we sometimes have.
Yeah, I think that, I think researchers just know deep in their hearts that like the closer you get to things, the more interesting they become. So I think when you're standing far away, when it's the VPs, SVPs, EVPs, now you're way up high in the food chain, and in some ways, like I'll just say, like not just metaphorical, but also like physically, when you're on the 28th floor of your big fancy building, making decisions, though the data you receive, even though there's a lot of it, as you say, it's extremely compressed and pressed right into these reports and metrics, and key measures have already been defined. And I'm sure Zach, you'll agree. Like as soon as something becomes a metric, it's dangerous because like then it's a gameable metric, right? Once you make a metric out of things, I think just one thing that I think a lot of times sort of qual and quant, and sort of how do you triangulate research that way? I think as soon as you start to make metrics, then they're easily gamed, right? And so that's certainly been true in the U.S. healthcare system as well. Like people are starting to game the metrics of like hospital readmission rates, which I think is such a powerful tool, right? To say, hey, not just did this person get well, get better, and get home, and then get better, but then were they readmitted? But I think there are ways, right, to game these metrics. As soon as you define like, hey, this is the game to play, well, then humans, right, will jump in and say, ooh, how do I play this game a little better? How do we play this game in a way that helps me? Um,
Yeah.
and so,
I,
so I just think that when you're far away from problems, when you're far away from the human experience, when you're far away from a process, it looks linear and clean and clear. And like, we know what the stage and gate is. Like, we know like, what is the gate at which we're going to release this person? What is what is a conversion on our website? When you look at average order volumes, right? When you're looking into the data and you're saying like, well, when you say average order volume, like, do you really mean like, is it all-time average? Like, are we when you start to put windows around things, you're just creating a whole bunch of your own, I guess I'll just say bias, but like your own perception and your own view of the world just gets built right into the data that you're showing to teams and making decisions with. And so I think that's inherent, right? I don't think there's a way out of that other than just to admit that the further you are away from it, the more clean it's going to feel, if that makes sense.
no, it does make sense, and I think that's actually a really nice lead in to kind of our next question here, which is how do you perform that triangulation? So if we kind of acknowledge that, hey, the further you are for the data from the data, or from the source of the data,
Sure.
the cleaner it looks, the more, maybe biases are built in, or maybe the less sort of actionable information you're actually getting. How do you kind of combine the qualitative, the first person experience, the inherently messy human aspect, with the high level quantitative metrics, which, you know, not to put too fine a point on this, which are still incredibly valuable, right? It's like, how do you kind of take the best
Yeah.
of both worlds and knit them together, to form, a more complete picture of, of the person, to inform your research objectives.
Yeah, I think there's a couple answers there. I would give one, maybe I'll just give two answers to that question. I think one answer is the order matters a lot. So one of the things I think that's good, sort of research practice, if you get a chance, right, to really inform and educate and sort of do you know, your very best effort across a lot of different research projects to answer one kind of big set of questions, I think is, that like qual, quant, qual. So bringing something that, bringing a harness to bear to say, hey, even though we know a lot, we're watching the funnels, we're watching the clickstream data, whatever data you have in product, telemetry kind of data, or in the case of grocery chains, right, they have so much register tape data, or hospitals, of course, spit off data in every direction. When you have that, you still probably should start with a qualitative study, because that really grounds out, that takes away, right, like all the historical stuff. It probably shakes everyone's biases loose a little bit, right? It might open, right, or reopen a set of conversations. And then so I like to start in the qual world, and then the qual helps us shape the quant. So one thing that happens a lot is in a qual study, we'll learn more about that ideal customer profile, right? We'll learn more about this, like all the users, and then it's like, who is this? Who is a great user? Or what kinds of users are going to deliver great sessions, right? So I think it's really great to define ideal customer profile from qual, but also to identify what I'll just call like ideal session types. And I think so many companies don't spend enough time thinking about that. Like, what is a perfect session on TikTok? Like, do they have a view that like this is the right amount of time to be spending in a TikTok session? Because I'm sure many of us have had the experience. I have certainly had the experience where it's like, oh, I'll just get on TikTok for 5 minutes before my meeting or before the thing, and then just like fall into a huge rabbit hole, and spend 20, 30 minutes there. And so TikTok certainly knows that, right? They watch the data closely on some of those factors. But if you can really carefully identify like what is it, what is a successful session inside of your tool, inside of the store, inside the hospital, well, that now we've created like a time bound for like, okay, well, this is the size of the box that the unit of analysis, I guess, if you want to be more scientific that way. So now you can actually start to ask all these questions. But that should come, I believe, mostly from qual work. And then, though, now you can start to dimensionalize that, create questions for quantitative efforts. So more survey-based or other quantitative metrics, or change how we're doing telemetry, where we say, well, this is a good session, and just like, let's build a bounding box for a thing called good sessions. And now let's use that to backpropagate out of that data. Who had a good session in the last 2 weeks? Now let's go look at that cohort, that little group. So those kinds of things. So that gives you like that kind of qualitative to start, quantitative in the middle, and then come back with the puzzles or interestingnesses or next steps coming out of a quant study. For me, often look like, well, yes, let's do this again in a year. So I mean, I think a lot of quant researchers also spend time looking at like repeated efforts in quant, but there should be puzzles, right, that come out of the quant work. And now you're saying, okay, now I've got some new questions and we can go back into qual. So that I think is just kind of a nice 1, 2, 3. And I think also another way to think about when I think about kind of this, the tension or the balance points between qual and quant, there's power in thinking like a qual researcher using quant tools. And I think the opposite, the vice versa is true as well. So bringing your best qualitative researcher to bear on a quant study isn't a mistake. It's actually a real benefit. And so to my eyes, and this actually gets a little bit to Reveal AI and the product that you guys have, there's something powerful in taking a more, I will just say, conversational or just a more give and take approach. Even if you don't actually use Reveal AI or another tool like it, I think there's power in using your best kind of qualitative, interview-based, or other kinds of qual orientation in sociology and anthropology, and then using that to actually help you build your survey instrument. And so I'll just give one example of that. It's like, it's so important what you put as the first little question group, and whether that should be all about them or something else. All about my situation, all about my company, all about my family, right? And so when you're thinking about that first way, right, the first way in a conversation, you're going to be so much more careful, and a qual researcher will have so many different, right, like just a really good beat on that. And I think, so many of us who design, sometimes we do some quant work as well, a good bit, in this kind of qualitative, quantitative way. There's power in thinking about it like a conversation instead of thinking about it like it's a survey instrument. And I would say just one last thing. For so many things out there in the world today, there are already validated survey questions. And I think that's just an underused resource. So one of my tips and tricks, just I deeply believe in going and getting the validated instrument, even if you're not going to use exactly those questions. I think there's power in going and looking. We did some work for a different healthcare company, and we looked at health information seeking behaviors. So there's just this whole big piece of like population health and how communities look for health data. And this is pre-internet, right? They've been doing that kind of research since people like talk to the neighbors and ask the doctor and all the other things, right? I watch TV shows, the PSAs that show up in the news. And health information seeking is just this whole set of behaviors. And there's some validated, there's validated tools for like, how happy am I? How connected am I to my environment? Like there's validated, from organizational psychology, if you're doing work in a big corporation, a big enterprise, there's validated instruments for like, how connected is this person to their job engagement, right? And just go get that from the Journal of Management Science in that case, or go to population health databases and population health journals and go and get like the survey that they ask. And that will open up, I think, just more chances, right, for that kind of like qualitative understanding of a quantitative instrument.
I mean, I think something that I really like about this, and it's also something we've heard from our customers, is the idea of using qual to sort of help define your subsequent quantitative methods.
Sure.
So I've had, I think we had one of our customers kind of describe it as, he's like, this is like our advanced like SEAL Team 6 or whatever, we want to send this in. We're going to use this to get the preliminary information, because they had realized like, oh, we actually can't, we don't know how to build the best quantitative, whether survey, whatever the method is, or we don't know exactly what to look for in the data until we do that kind of initial work where we really talk to the people and, like you said, shake some of our biases loose, right?
Sure.
And kind of
Yeah.
use that to give you clues or specific directions about how to structure those subsequent research initiatives. And one thing I also like, maybe we'll get a new term out of this, is kind of your sequencing of starting with qual, going to quant, and then finishing up with qual. It's like the qual sandwich,
The
where you
qual
kind of
sandwich.
have it,
Yeah.
bookending either side, and you have like the big quantitative, study or initiative
Constant.
in
Yeah.
the middle there. One thing we were talking about before we started the show is what a term I think you've coined, which is the give a damn hurdle. So this is the threshold at which people actually start to care about the thing, the new product, the
Sure.
thing that
Yeah.
it's worth it to add it into their daily life. So can you tell me kind of a little bit more about that and how you sort of approach that threshold in your research work?
Yeah. Great topic, because so many startup founders and corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, we all spend time just falling in love with our idea, but also I would say like projecting out that Steve Jobsian kind of like reality distortion field, right? Your job is to just be such a believer in your product and be unwavering in that belief, right? That's what it takes to get something through all of the fiery hoops, right, out into the market, and start to build something great, right? Start to build a great company. It takes that, and I think for me, when I counsel startup founders, I tell them all the time, like, you have to keep your absolute confidence and the hubris almost, right, to stay the course, and also they'll show up like with a lot of humility. And so it's really tough balance, because it's hard to be both totally hubristic and humble. That is a hard thing to have. But I think successful entrepreneurs are built that way, and I think corporate teams, right, that get their innovations through all of those stages and gates and out into the world, and right, start to build new fun bolt-ons to these big behemoth businesses. Um, Everybody struggles, right, with this threshold, which is, what is, you think, oh, I'm going to show you a new idea, a new way, a better mousetrap, a new cool innovation, and it's just going to be better, and you'll just switch. And when you get close to it, though, that isn't what happens, right? That isn't how it goes. And I just think it's valuable to bring some of that perspective to the research work you do. I'll give just a couple quick tips on it. One is, you can't trust what people say, and they're not going to lie to you on purpose, but they just always tell you, either in surveys, in interviews, in ride-alongs, or more ethnographic efforts. You'll say, "Hey, man, that sounds frustrating," or, "Oh, I'm watching you do this, and it seems pretty frustrating," or like, "Hey, rate your frustration of this of this pain point on a scale of 1 to 5," and people will definitely tell you, things are frustrating. They'll tell you they want to switch, but then they don't, right? They they don't switch, and I think there's a couple different framings I like, sort of thinking about like, how do you make how do you find the people, the real advice there is like to find the people for whom the pain really is intense, and them switching is just going to be far easier than finding people who are feeling the pain, but it's just a 3 out of 5. Um, and one of the ways that I like to go about kind of getting people into that kind of give a damn threshold conversation, or the sort of the give a damn hurdle, is um, actively like work to build a conversation that is like, oh, um, let me think about how to say this exactly right. Um, I think about a lot of the conversations that I'm in about the give a damn threshold, and I think about them as how do you sell like the truest sense of like what is going to be the differentiator that's the break point. But for me, that's always just the functional, just that sort of more uh, intellectual version. I think the real way to get around the give a damn threshold is to borrow from the behavioral economists and say, what are the behaviors that you're going to tie your innovation to? So, the idea that you can tie this to the way people, boot up their day today, the way that people close down their day, the way that they accomplish, right, a task that's adjacent, right, to the thing you're solving. I think that's often as important or even more important than like really carefully going through all the feature prioritization or going through all the differentiators or saying like, hey, is this messaging going to resonate better than that messaging? It's actually to take all of that good effort, but then also match it with a really good sense of what's the actual behaviors that people are doing today that you can bolt your thing onto. So if you can bolt your tool into a process or a system that people are using today, I think those are just going to be so much better. So there's a few, like, I'll just give the example of like some CRM tools, and the CRMs that sit inside and they just use like CSS to go and like reconfigure how Google looks, Gmail looks, or Google Calendar looks. Those are doing so much better than like getting people to like wholesale pick up and move, because it's just a bolt, right? It bolts into behaviors and an experience pattern, right, that people already understand.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Just from where I sit, kind of on the marketing side of things, which is usually when you're trying to sell a new product, position your product in the marketplace. You're not leading with the features, right? Oh, we do this much faster. This is this much better. It's you're really selling outcomes, right? Or in the
Mhm.
case of maybe like an apparel brand or something like that, you're selling a lifestyle. You're selling sort of aspirations. Sort of these bigger picture things. And in your case, you're talking about, yeah, you are connecting it to existing behaviors, right? And so
Yep. Yep.
yeah, trying to find the area that your customer already gives a damn about
Yep.
and saying, okay, I know you care about this thing. How do I leverage that to, help bring my product and make it appealing to you and you can get over that threshold?
Yeah, I'll give you a third one of those. Like, when when we look at like the history of advertising, and I think I learned a lot about how brands grow, and they're really about, you know, I think we all worry about retention in today's world, right? So many people are like, "Oh, retention matters so much," and for any kind of like big mess, like CPG kind of product, you and I were talking a little bit about liquid death, and other of these like fun new direct to consumer or other kinds of new products. In those spaces, it's really about trial. And I think driving trial is the ball game. And so I think moving from, an orientation where a lot of the research focus has to be on making sure current customers get what they need, making sure current subscribers are succeeding. Um, the way to grow when you look at how brands really grow is by just supercharging kind of trial, right? And so finding ways to peel off a little piece of your value chain and stuff it into the signed out version of the website. How do you get people into the freemium, right, and watch people in a free product, uh, who aren't paying money, but now you've got a chance, right, to actually start to change the world for them a little bit. I think those are some really good ways to think about, in addition, to the behavior one, and in addition to the one you mentioned.
That's awesome. And I feel like we're getting a little bonus content here. We're normally talking, going deep on research, and now we're getting into to brand growth and driving more sales and stuff. So for people who make it this far in the episode, they're getting all sorts of goodies here. Um, last kind of main topic I want to tackle here is, you have some really interesting perspectives on kind of how AI is playing into the research landscape. In some of our conversations, you mentioned you think it's going to be big, and so I'd love to just hear kind of what's your perspective. How is AI impacting research? Obviously, we've been talking a lot about the human element of research, and
Sure.
AI introduces, well, this decidedly it's not really a human element, right? But it is augmenting some of our sort of human methods for conducting research. So, as
Yep.
someone who's really deep in the space, I would love to just hear kind of your perspective. Do you think it's net positive, and where you see it going?
Yeah, I think it's a net positive for sure. I'm always optimistic about technology leaps and this one too. I think people do have trepidation, and I'll just give a couple of those trepidations. But I do want to reiterate, like, I think AI is going to create massive, massive change. I wouldn't say that I'm bullish that like it's going to be a net positive in terms of every person who works in a product role today is going to keep their job, or every person who works in a research role, or even sort of UI design, interaction designer kinds of roles. I think those roles are going to change a good bit, and I think eventually you cannot imagine a world where there aren't fewer of those people doing it. At the same time, I think that research is the ball game. I think research is the place where uh, if anything won't fall to kind of AI based generative tooling, it's the human element, right? Humans are deeply complex, and they're complex beyond just the English sentences, right? That are easiest places for AIs to work. There's a lot of knowledge in the world, and I know that you study philosophy, and so you probably buy this point better than some other of my of my conversation partners on this. I feel like there are things and insights about the world that are like hard to put into English sentences, and I think parts of the human experience are just like very experienced, and at the same time like hard to describe and hard to say definitively this is the only kinds of things that there are. There's only you know a certain number of kinds of experiences. I just think experience isn't like that. And so given that, I guess, sort of like philosophical claim or assumption, right, about the world, well then I think insights is going to stay a really big important topic. And as other parts, right, of new product development get easier and easier, so it's easier than ever to make a website. It'll get easier and easier to make a blog post series. It'll get easier and easier to build UI and move buttons around on the screen. I think those things are going to get a lot easier. And then what it's not clear to me it is going to get easier is like the actual thing of like, is this a good idea or not? Is this something consumers want? And I would say that consumers hate to be tricked, and so one thing that that probably won't work is like, oh well, we're just gonna make a whole bunch of different pieces and parts and like make a bunch of mediocre things, and then you know like see what happens, and the users are still going to desire, right, like some mediocre janky version, right, that was built by AI. I think I'm a believer that it's going to change a good bit, and the worlds of all of us who work in research, or even that broader world of people who work in products, those worlds are going to change a good bit. But I think that what won't fall is like human complexity. I just think that it's not just an accident, or it's not just something that we just like don't have quite enough data for yet. I think that's something that's actually like pretty tough to solve. Uh,
Uh,
so that's
it's awesome to hear your perspective, Zach, because I think I definitely have the perspective that as AI tooling gets better and better, not just within the research realm, but within
yeah, sure,
content creation and
all
everything else,
all over.
as those things get easier, like you said, it makes the human and the human experience more important than ever. Um, and the the differentiator that I think humans will always have is the ability to articulate. They're not always perfectly, as you kind of pointed out, their experience, their preference, and so the human is really like it's like the most important like atomic unit as the rest of the landscape kind of becomes more generative in nature, and
Sure.
AI kind of eats into different aspects of our workflows. And so, yeah, I think that from our perspective at Reveal, what we kind of see happening is essentially AI becoming a tool to better source and connect with and uncover human experiences at scale.
Hmm.
And so it's not saying, "Hey, let's somehow remove the human from the equation." It's actually the opposite. It's saying, "How do we center the human
Sure.
more
Even
than ever?"
see, center
Yeah,
them more than ever. And I love that. I think I'm definitely bearish on ideas that are like, you should talk to a synthetic human about them, about their experience on a website. And it's like, that does not feel like the right use of AI to me. But I think I'm bullish, as are you, on this idea that like keeping humans at the center, but doing it in new and better ways using AI is really cool. And as someone who spent countless hours in my career analyzing qual data and, for example, like generating codes out of like true kind of ethnographic research. I've done this both in professional life but also in academia a good bit, like actually done that kind of true open coding effort, which is so fun, so powerful, so such a big part of doing kind of that I think ethnographic work, and watching AI do that in seconds instead of weeks, um, does give me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies sometimes. I would say the one question I have for you, and it's not something that we're going to answer right now, but a question I have for kind of that world is how how do we ensure that when we bring AI into research, it doesn't just give us like massively scalable stereotypes or like platitudes instead of like that germ of true insight. And I'm sure you've noticed this. I've noticed it a bunch of times where the kinds of things that AIs can generate when you're just writing a letter, doing other stuff, it it's got that smack of like genericness, or that it's just full of platitudes, or it just feels like this is a stereotypical letter that a stereotypical person would stereotypically write. And so you have to be careful, I think. I mean, I think the one caution I have, or the one place where I'm like really worried about, and I've read all the books about it, like Kathy O'Neill's book, like Weapons of Math Destruction, where you're like watching big data and AI systems start to be used right in these decision making tool sets that can be reinforcing biases, reinforcing bad things, that humans can do. I think that when AI gets deeper and deeper into research, we'll start to see, right, whether it's as good as the kind of insights, right, that humans generate, or to my hope that, and I'm sure yours too, that humans and AIs together actually generate incredibly powerful insights from all the data that's available to us today.
yeah, and just to kind of double down on what you said there, that's definitely how I see it, and I'd say how we see it, which is this is another tool in the toolkit
For sure.
for researchers. So researchers are in the driver's seat, and the human researcher is indispensable in that process. I think anyone who makes the claim that, oh, we're going to automate all this away and now you can just have this machine do this, and no, that's
Yeah.
not even remotely the case, and it's not even remotely close to being reality. What we really need is expert professionals using yet another tool to perform research in a different way at a greater scale, potentially faster. And then to your other point, also being in the loop to kind of sanity check the results, right?
Yeah, of course.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think the best thing about AI is when you actually have a really unique underlying data set. That is where you get those really unique results. Because to your point, a generic model is going to spit out generic outputs every single time. We all have access to the same model of GPT. That's why so many of these like automated blog posts and everything else, they kind of all sound the same. Like they're all written by the same person. But
Yeah.
when you can actually go and source really unique insights and then use AI against that unique data set,
You got
that's
the
where
data.
the magic starts happening.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah. Can't wait. Can't wait to see what everyone creates.
yeah. Cool. So Zach, I think we're gonna wrap here. Can you just give us like basically an on ramp to following you on social, finding out more about what you do at Helpfully? You guys do great work, and I'm sure people are going to be excited to come check you guys
Yeah.
out. So just let us know where they can find you.
Yeah, we're always recruiting researchers as well. So we hire a good number of freelance researchers across qualitative, quantitative, any other specialties. Something that we're very committed to bringing to our clients, right? The the best in class of the research community, and so something that we're really pushing hard on. You can obviously check us out at our website, helpfully.com. We're on all the social media channels at Helpfully Team. And I would say also just a shout out to my local Atlanta meetup. Helpfully is also a big co-host and runs the UX Research Atlanta meetup, where all the researchers get together in virtual and in-person ways and learn together, commune, hang out, drink beers, have a really good time. And so, yeah, check us out. We're love to connect to more and varied people in the research community.
That is awesome. Yeah, and I will encourage everyone go check out Helpfully on all the different socials. And if you're in the area, you should go to the meetup too. I haven't been to it, but talking UX and drinking beer is never a bad time. So
Good time.
people
Good
should
time.
definitely check it out. Cool. Hey, thank you so much, Zach. This has been awesome. Great way to kick off the new year. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Zach, great conversation. Can't wait to talk more.